Welcome to our home for our Monday supper. I'm Camille Vaska, Mike's wife, and also a volunteer, along with our two sons, Grant and Nathan, for his campaign for Attorney General. Today, our guest is Dave Reichert, who until recently was a member of Congress for the 8th District, which includes parts of King, Pierce, Chelan, Douglas, and Kittitas counties. Before that, Dave was the elected sheriff for King County. We'll talk with Dave about how we can all listen, learn, and begin to move forward on issues of race and justice in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Hello, Dave. Thank you for joining us.
There we go. Hello. Can you hear me?
It's hard to believe.
Yes, we can hear you, Dave.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. It's hard to believe this is our 10th live stream event for Mike's Attorney General campaign. Each week, we've had leaders on our show from all over the state. Mike and our guests have discussed important topics like homelessness, the legality of the stay-at-home order, and last week, the cyber theft of several hundred millions of dollars from our state employment security department. But our discussion this week may be our most important yet. Our guest, Dave Reichert, has been a national leader on issues of race and justice. He made a joint statement on how our country can move forward on these issues several years ago with Representative John Lewis, a member of Congress and civil rights leader who walked across the bridge in Selma, Alabama, with the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Our family watched the movie Selma this weekend. It's a very painful and powerful American story. Now I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Camille. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And thank you, Camille, for co-hosting 10 of these late live stream events. As you can all see, our kids got all of their talent from my wife. Before we get to this week's topic, let me give you an update from last week's supper, where we talked about the cyber theft of hundreds of millions of dollars from our state by Nigerian gangs. The state admitted last week the amount stolen from the Employment Security Department is more than $600 million. Even before this, which is one of the biggest heists in history, I called for creation of a cybercrime unit in the Attorney General's office. Bob Ferguson abandoned the cybercrime unit that former AG Chris Gregoire had created, and Governor Jay Inslee appointed one of his cronies, a fundraiser for his political party, to run the agency. As your Attorney General, I will be an independent watchdog for you over state government to ensure this kind of fraud does not happen again. Now to this evening's important conversation with Representative Dave Reichert. George Floyd was an American who was killed by a Minneapolis police officer. He was Black, yes, but more importantly, he was a Black American who deserved protection like all Americans under our Constitution and laws. And so his death is an American problem, not just a Black American problem. Our country was founded on the ideal of equal justice and protection by the rule of law for everyone. Unfortunately, for many Black Americans and others, we have not yet lived up to that ideal. It is up to all of us who believe in the founding ideals of our country to be part of the solution. This week's Wall Street Journal NBC poll found that 80% of Americans believe our country is out of control. I suspect many of you believe that about our state as well. We've been hit with a pandemic, a lockdown of our lives and our economy, and now protests and riots. Small businesses already suffering from the shutdown now have to deal with looting. Police are being attacked. The experts say the protests could cause COVID-19 cases to surge again. You are watching tonight because you want to do something about it. You want to get our state back under control. And you'll have a chance very soon when we start voting in the primary elections in July. I launched my campaign for Attorney General during a pandemic because I believed the state needs new leadership. I have been a lawyer at one of our state's top law firms for 30 years. I have decades of experience as a business community and political leader. I've succeeded in tackling some of our state's toughest challenges by bringing people together, not dividing us into partisan camps like our current governor and attorney general. As your next Attorney General, I will work hard for you. I will be your independent watchdog to ensure that all of our state's citizens receive due process and equal protection under the rule of law. Now to our guest, former Congressman and Sheriff, Dave Reichert. Dave, I'm so honored that you have endorsed our campaign for Attorney General. I've known you for a long time, and you are one of the finest public servants our state has seen.
Well, that's awful kind of you to say. We just do the best that we can, right? And we try. I know that you have the heart of a servant. And your opening statement for those who are listening in this evening really explains why I am supporting you. All of those things that you mentioned, equal treatment under the law, justice for all, independent representative for Attorney General for the people of the state of Washington. The words that you use certainly point to the fact that you understand and recognize all the major issues going on currently, but you also have worked on some of the smaller issues, but are important to people also over your career. And one of your talents that I've recognized is your ability to bring people together. And it's going to be very difficult in this day and age to accomplish that. But I believe that you're the person who can do that. And that's why I'm excited about being a part of your campaign. And thank you for inviting me here tonight.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dave. Let me get to some questions that I have, and I think probably our viewers will be interested in hearing your answers to. The video of George Floyd's death while his neck was pinned by a police officer's knee lasted for about 8 minutes. I think most of our viewers have seen that video. Dave, can you tell us what you saw in that video from the perspective of a former sheriff, a former law enforcement officer?
Well, I haven't talked to one police officer who is not outraged by that video and disgusted by that video. When I first saw it, my reaction was disbelief. I have been in situations in my career where you've had to engage physically, and I have never put my neck on the back of someone's, or my knee on the back of someone's neck or in someone's throat. But I have put my knee on the back of somebody's back. I have bent their arm up around their back. But you do those things to protect yourself. You do those things as a police officer. You do those things to protect the people around you. And then when you have that person under control, then they're placed in the police car. And understand this George was claustrophobic. They should have found a way to put him in a larger vehicle to accommodate him for that. Those are things that police officers are trained to do today. So outrage, disgusting. I can't imagine. It is beyond my comprehension why someone would put his knee on the neck of another human being, whether he's being arrested or not, for 8 to 9 minutes. Makes no sense.
Yes, very. The video is very hard to watch. So, Dave, you were the King County Sheriff during the World Trade Organization riots in 1999. I think they called it the Battle in Seattle. Might have made a movie about it even. Those started as peaceful protests, but then it became a war zone with destruction everywhere and a huge police presence. The initial round of George Floyd protests have been likened to the WTO, but they occurred all around our state. We received a robocall at our home in Issaquah telling us to stay home because there was a curfew. How hard is it for law enforcement to sort out who is a peaceful protester and who is there to create mayhem and incite a riot and destruction?
Yeah, so before I get to that specific question, just let me say I really want to recognize the law enforcement men and women who, especially in our own community here, who have been on the job for, it seems like 24/7, probably for all of them. And I do relate to that, having been out there during WTO with 50,000 people rioting in the streets of Seattle. It's a hard job. The police are the targets of these protests and riots, but then we're also asking the police officers to protect us at the same time, but then we don't want them to do anything. So imagine being in a uniform, standing on the street, and I sat there during WTO and I watched this happen right on the front lines with our deputies and police officers from around the state, officers being pushed, officers having things thrown at them, hit on top of the head with sticks and batons, and they stood their ground. They just stood and stared and stood at attention. They took the abuse, they took the verbal abuse, they took the physical abuse. It takes an immense amount of restraint, whether you're a trained police officer or not, as a human being, to tell yourself, this is not about me. It's about whatever the protest is, whatever the riot's about, and your job is to protect the public and keep the peace and keep your cool. So with that said, I just have the greatest admiration for those who are out there today. And in fact, I was talking to the Salt Lake City Police Chief this afternoon, and I was telling him I wished I could be back on the street again. And he says, I've got 38 years on. I wish you can have my job. I'm leaving. He says, I wonder why I'm still here. But that was a deputy chief. Of course, he was joking. But it is very difficult to determine who your peaceful protesters are and your agitators are. And we were able to determine through some intelligence information that we had anarchists coming into the city of Seattle to take advantage of the situation and create this chaos. And as people know, all it takes is one or two people within a large group like that to incite people to get their anger up and to take action, whether it's burning a car or a trash can or burning a building. So the officers have a very difficult job, especially when they're instructed not to make arrests. And during WTO, part of the week, there were instructions from certain elected officials that the cops would not make arrests. And I think that's, in my personal opinion, that's a mistake. My deputies were ordered to make arrests. And I think you have to bring peace and calm back to the city. Just because you want to protest and you have the right to express yourself, our Constitution gives you that right to express yourself. It doesn't give you the right to trample on the rights of other people.
There have been several other videos of Black men being killed by police officers over the last several years. The one in Ferguson, Missouri, resulted in nationwide protests, and others have as well. But George Floyd's death has led to protests and riots not only across our country, but all around the world. This time the response seems much bigger. What do you think is causing that?
Well, I think probably the most critical piece that I've looked at that could be a cause of this such widespread is that this has been ongoing, and the video is so dramatic and so tragic to watch. I don't know how I became angry. So if you're a part of a community that feels underrepresented, that feels discriminated against, that feels like there is no justice, when you watch a video like that, it confirms everything that you feel, everything that you think negative about the justice system. And the face of the justice system are those uniformed cops. So they will be the first people that will be acted out, the action will be taken out on them because they're the face, they're the people on the street. So I do think that's number one. Number two, the timing of this couldn't have been any worse. Because of the COVID virus, to people not being able to go out and not being able to sort of have that freedom to go wherever they wanted to go. I think there was a lot of pent up anger over government control of their lives. And this also gave some, I think, this was not obviously the reason, but it gave some energy to that movement. I mean, the officers' actions were deplorable, disgusting, and unbelievable. The video showing that for people to see, I think, just enraged a lot of people, and rightly so.
Yeah, it seems like this is the only time I can remember where large swaths of the entire world we're calling it a lockdown, stay at home, but for many it felt like a lockdown. And just really as the country is starting to open up, this happened. And it seemed to be a confluence of the sheer pain and anger that people felt over watching that video. And some pent up desire to express themselves. That's, I think, for historians to sort through, but it certainly is unique in my experience. Well, let me ask you. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Just one more thing. Yeah, I do think that there is some responsibility that people are at least beginning to talk about, and the charges followed the officer whose knee was on George Floyd's neck. Those officers that stood by and didn't take action, that didn't say, remove your knee, get up, let him up, he can't breathe. There is a responsibility, and I've been in that position too in my past career, where I've had to say, hey, whoa, stop, and in the heat of battle, some people can get, can overreact, even if you're trained. And all of us together as a team hold each other accountable. And in law enforcement, in my experience, I've witnessed officers remind other officers to do the right thing. 99.9% of the people that I've worked with in law enforcement over my career are people who want to serve, who want to protect, who want to do the right thing, and want to treat everybody equally under the law. But you're always going to have that small percentage that kind of fall through the cracks in the hiring process, and at some point during their career, they're identified by some incident like this.
Okay, well, as a congressman, Dave, you are known as an expert on law enforcement, obviously because of your background as a sheriff. And you were one of 12 members of the Policing Strategies Working Group formed after 5 Dallas police officers were killed in, 2017. The committee included 6 members of the Congressional Black Caucus and 6 Republicans. What did you learn from that experience that might help us understand how to move forward on healing our racial divide and ensuring that all Americans feel like they receive just treatment in the hands of police?
Yeah, I volunteered for that committee, and it was a committee that was focused on criminal justice reform, as well as looking at the relationship between community and police. And as we went around the country, and we went to 5 major cities, and then we invited the city of Baltimore command staff and others and community members to come to Washington, D.C. and meet with us. We heard from young African-American males, especially, who feel like they, were pulled over for driving while black, as they call it. And it's interesting to an educational and eye-opening, revelational for some people to hear directly from the community. I'd known some of this obviously myself through my career, but the important, I think the important ingredient, I could go on about what all the things that we learned, but I think I just focus on this one thing tonight. The most important ingredient that we came away with was local communication, and that partnership between local law enforcement and the community, and the involvement that the community has, not just when there's some, as a sheriff or police chief, you have a major incident, a tragedy occur, and all of a sudden you show up in the community and say, hey, my name is Sheriff Reichert and I'm here to help. And they go, where have you been, before? You've got to be engaged, deeply engaged with the community, bringing people together. That's what you're going to be good at, Mike, is bringing people together. And what that does is create those partnerships and relationships before what hits the fan. And it brings people together. They know each other then. So when there is an event, you can sit down, you can talk, you can discuss, and you know that my heart is in the right place. I want to make a difference. But if I just show up as an unknown, you have no idea. And your first impression is, you know what? You don't care. You haven't been here. I don't know you. Why should I even sit down and share with you? So what I came away with from that was that the community wants to be involved. And we've got to make sure that that happens.
It is so very important that we reach out to members of the Black community to build understanding, as you've said. My father taught me an important lesson when he ordered a subscription for our family to Ebony magazine during the race riots of the early 1970s. Here we were, a white family in Redmond, which was almost entirely white back then, getting a Black lifestyle magazine. My dad told our family that if we saw Black people living just like white people do, then we would hopefully not inherit the prejudice that so many others carried with them. And then when I was going to law school in Chicago on the mostly Black South Side, I had the chance to work as a part-time clerk for an all-Black law firm doing work for Chicago's first Black mayor. I was hired because I was white. I asked the managing partner why he wanted to hire a white person, and his reasoning was much like my dad's. He said his Black staff would benefit by getting to see that white people are more the same than they are different than Black people. I learned from my dad and from that Chicago lawyer, Donald Hubert, that basic human connection goes a long way to eliminating prejudice in our society. And I think that's what I was hearing you say too, Dave.
Absolutely.
So the protests are in their second week. They seem to be more peaceful now, somewhat, but the calls for solutions are getting more radical. Some are calling for defunding the police force, even disbanding the police force. Seattle's Socialist City Council member, Kashama Sawant, is calling for Mayor Jenny Durkin to resign or be impeached over how Seattle police has responded. Where do you see this going, and what can I or any of us do to get us to a better place as we move forward?
Yeah, well, and I wish I had the answers to that question, but I can give you some of my thoughts. I always, I drove my staff a little bit nuts, but because I would always say, look, I'm the oldest of 7 kids from the Renton Highlands and the East Hill of Kent Meridian graduate. And I was fortunate enough to become a police officer and blessed enough to go through the ranks and become the sheriff and end up as a congressman for 14 years. And that doesn't mean that, I have all the answers. In Congress, I always say I may not have been the smartest one in Congress, but I was one who listened. And I think right now, the key is that we need to listen to each other. And I was always taught not to make decisions during a highly emotional time in your life. So if a loved one passes away, your spouse passes away, and someone decides that they're going to sell their house and leave and go somewhere else, and a few months later, they regretted that decision because they moved away from their friends and their family. I think in today's environment, people who are calling for the police departments to be disbanded and defunded are having a knee-jerk reaction to this situation. That is not the solution to the problem. Are there solutions to bringing, to moving ahead? Yes, there are, but I think you get to that in a later question as to what we can do. And I'll talk about some of those things, but I think right now, some of the city council members in Minneapolis, some of our city council members in Seattle, some other officials calling for defunding police departments and disbanding police departments. That's the worst thing that we can do at this time. The need right now is for calm, understanding, listening, and moving forward with the idea of working together to find a solution to making sure that everyone is treated equally under the law, and that police officers are well trained and they have the tools to do their job.
We just got a question from Mariana Parks. Dave, I'm sure remember Mariana Parks,
I do.
your former chief aide, whatever her title was.
District director.
She asks if you, when you were sheriff, if anyone ever called for defunding the sheriff's office. Did I get it right, Josh?
Yeah.
Okay.
For defunding? No.
Yeah. Have you ever run into a call for defunding the police or the sheriff while you've been in public service before this?
And that's a good question too, because during WTO and also during some time during our sheriff's office, we've had we had conflicts that we had to resolve. And as we met with community members, the overwhelming feeling was we just want fairness. We want to be respected. We want police to be accountable. We want police to be held accountable and responsible for their actions. We want our police to be well trained. We want to be treated fairly, but we want police in our neighborhoods. So we want to have police in our neighborhoods. We want to be protected too. I want my children to be protected. I want them to be able to go to school safely. I want to be able to go to work safely and return home. I want to know that I'm safe in my home. All of those things are consistent in any neighborhood that you go to. And I think you'll find that today. I think that the people who are calling for disbanding and defunding are more of the radical belief. And I do think that there is a lot of room for further training, adjusting the budget. I think adjusting responsibilities. For example, we give police officers the responsibility, and I did through my whole career. Why are police officers responsible for mental illness? Why are we the ones that have, we don't have, we're cops, we enforce the law. Mental illness needs to be handled by mental health professionals and doctors. How about drug addiction and alcoholism? Those are social problems that need to be dealt with by the community, not by the police department. But all of these social ills, the social problems, are foisted upon the police. And so when something goes awry, who gets blamed for it? If something goes wrong, it's the police. And their job is to enforce the law, but here we are put in the middle of what do you do with the person who's mentally ill, who's on the street? What do you do with someone who's, now you can't do anything if somebody's exposing themselves or sleeping on the sidewalks, or back in my day we had vacancy laws. We had if kids were out of school, we had to take them back to their home or take them to school. We had drunken public laws. Domestic violence didn't even used to be an issue. We showed up at the house, solved the problem, sent somebody to somebody else's house. We've evolved in our thinking as a society and how to handle these problems, fortunately evolved to handle them in a much better way, a more humane way. And the message there is we must continue to evolve. We're always changing. The police departments are always changing and have to be changing with our community.
Let me, we got another question, but I'm going to loop it in a minute here. And let me talk about homelessness for a minute. Even before the recent rioting, our streets felt unsafe in many communities because of homelessness and related public safety issues, which were the #1 issue statewide. I was shocked when the judges in the King County Courthouse shut the main 3rd Avenue entrance because of more than 100 assaults on people seeking justice. Then a month later, 9 people were shot waiting for the bus at the other end of 3rd Avenue. Bob Ferguson said nothing about it. Instead, Bob Ferguson has become the darling of national partisan groups by focusing the office on bringing lawsuits on national issues. I've promised to focus on protecting the Evergreen State and to make dealing with homelessness and related public safety issues one of my top priorities as Attorney General, and to do it with compassion and respect for the rule of law. Now, you worked in that courthouse and dealt with homelessness as sheriff. What advice would you give to me about how to begin to solve that challenge?
Yeah, well, the words that you just used is that's why I'm here tonight, and that's why I'm supporting you. The words compassion, understanding, and fairness. Those are words that are just part of your everyday vocabulary. And I really appreciate that about you, and the fact that you've dedicated yourself to the local public safety issues, I think is critical right now. And yes, I've said to many people that Mr. Ferguson's only claim to fame is the number of lawsuits that he's filed against the federal government, believing that that's his job. Sadly, things are going crazy in his own state, and he's not paying attention to that. So I know you'll be all over that. And when I was the sheriff, I was a runaway when I was a kid. I left my home when I was a senior in high school, and I lived in an old 1956 Mercury down in the Kent Valley for a while. So I struggled through getting through high school, but understand why people leave their homes. And so we have to address why. Why are people on the street? That's the question and there's a lot of answers to that. But understanding the why are people homeless, and understanding the why, you begin to then ask the questions, how can we solve that problem by looking at the reasons people are homeless? Maybe it's because they've been abused at home. Maybe, and that's the case of many people, where they've been physically, emotionally, or mentally abused at home. And they leave home, they run away, and they're on the street, and they get into that lifestyle. They then become drug addicted, or alcohol addicted. They sometimes get involved in crime. They also get involved in human trafficking, which is also crime. But and I know this because working in the Green River case, I worked on the street a lot, and I talked to homeless people a lot. I was out on the street with homeless people, and so I think the first thing is understanding the why people are on the street, and then beginning to say, okay, if this is why this person is homeless, what can we do to take away the reason for that person being homeless, and then move on to the next why, and the next why, and the next why. And the other problem here is that I don't know if you remember when Mark Sidran ran for mayor, but his mantra was misdemeanors matter. And I've noticed that in Seattle, misdemeanors don't matter anymore. And you could walk the streets of Seattle when misdemeanors did matter, and feel safe. And today, once you start to ease up on the little things become big things. And I'm not saying that you have to arrest everybody for jaywalking, but what I'm saying is there has to be the rule of law, there has to be organization, there has to be structure. The rights of the average American citizen, the businessman, the businesswoman in our cities across the country have to be protected. They can't be stomped on by other people. And the homeless people need our help. I've got a lot of ideas on that, but I would take up the entire night if I went off on that topic. But I think the first question we need to ask about the homeless is why are they there? I know some people are already asking that question, but that'll give you the answers as to how you can solve it once we understand the why.
Well, we'll have you back to talk more about homelessness. That it is the state's number one issue. It's a statewide issue. I spent the last 3 years as chair of one of our Republican groups. Through that group, we've been looking at the issue and talking to experts. We've had some of those leaders and experts on this program. And the good news is there are solutions. There are ways to address this problem with compassion and with respect for the rule of law. But there are things that need to happen at the statewide level to bring those solutions to a wider sphere, if you will, and to make sure that everyone is getting the benefit of those solutions. So part of what I'm doing while I'm running is I'm trying to build that coalition right now, so that when I'm Attorney General, we're going to be on this problem, which sadly may be more challenging in the wake of some of the employment challenges our state is going to face. Very, very important. But yes, that's not the focus of tonight. Let me turn to one other topic, and then we'll wrap up with you. Let me turn to politics. You are one of our state's most successful political figures, first as an elected King County Sheriff. Then you succeeded in getting elected to and holding a congressional seat in the kind of moderate so-called swing district that Republicans have not lately been able to win. I and every other statewide Republican candidate this year needs to do well in those moderate swing districts. What advice do you have for me and for the rest of our statewide Republican candidates? In 5 words or less, what do we do?
Mike, part of it is just being, it's difficult right now, right? For you, you can't go out and really meet people on the street. That was the parades, the festivals, and all of those things. People want to see, feel, and touch. They want to put you in the corner. They want to ask you those tough questions. They want to see you squirm. They want to see how you answer those questions. You got to put yourself in those situations, and people want to see your heart. And I think that when people see Mike, they're going to see a person who cares. Like you've said the word compassion, I don't know how many times tonight, but people need to see that about you. People are looking, and I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, people are looking for someone that they can look to that brings that even-minded, logical, common-sensed, calm, measured, I don't know many other adjectives I can use, approach to your elected position. And especially as the Attorney General, when it applies to the law, the sheriff, the same thing. I was the sheriff for everyone, and you will be the Attorney General for everyone. So politically speaking, you have to be a person who represents all the people, and that means not being pulled to the left or being pulled to the right. Now, the left and the right aren't going to appreciate that, but that's, I always said that the votes that I took in Congress, I took because they were the right thing to do. And I made those votes based upon fact. And that's the job that you'll have, making your decisions based upon fact. And when you make your decisions based upon the facts with a compassionate heart, that puts you in the middle, where moderate Democrats or even those leaning a little bit more to the left and Republicans can all support you, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on public safety, whether it's on education, whether it's on transportation. All of those things can be solved, again, with one of your talents and bringing people together and letting them know as you campaign that that's your strength and that's your desire.
Well, thank you, Dave, for that. We did receive another question back to the issue of policing and the aftermath of George Floyd's death. This comes from Ann Donnelly, who's a former chair of the Clark County Republican Party. She's a leader in dealing with mental health issues in Southwest Washington, and a business leader herself. She has many, many accomplishments. I could spend much time talking about that. But her question is for you: is there one thing that police departments or law enforcement can do in the immediate future to avoid further situations like we saw in Minneapolis?
Yeah, it's really training. And it'd be one of the things that I, would mention at the end of our discussion, but I'll talk about it now. When I was the sheriff, my training budget was, I think, was $87,000 for 1,200 employees. I had an $87,000 budget. So when you talk about defunding a police department, that would be one of the first things that would be taken away from me when I was the sheriff, is my training budget. So you can go through the academy for a year, you can go through training, you can be on probation, and then you're a full-fledged officer after a year. And then you have a 1-week retread school, they call it, retraining for 1 week. And every now and then, if a new topic or a new law was passed or new training techniques, then they would update you on those throughout the year. Just, sort of, by the way, this is the new policy. It's gotten more sophisticated since I was the sheriff. It's gotten more in depth, but I think that more money toward hiring and focused on hiring the right people, and more money toward training and interaction and allowing the police officers to interact within the community. Those would be the major.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Mariana, for those questions. And Dave, thanks for your answers. And thanks for your wisdom and insight, and for being our guest. I know you're busy, you're selling a house, you got a lot going on, and thank you for taking the time to join us. I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else, I know we could talk for much longer, but you're busy, and I'm sure your wife would like to see some of you tonight. Is there anything else you want to add before we close with you?
Yeah, just real quick, I wrote down a real quick list of some of the things that people might be able to do as they look forward to healing this country. And the first thing I wanted to mention is go back to is this is it's a local issue. This is really where citizens need to get involved with their local police departments, open up a dialogue, and build that community relationship between the police and the community. I think too that at a federal level, people ask, well, what can members of Congress do? And right now they're looking at some laws that would reform how we hold the police accountable. One of the things I think the federal government can do in these situations, if there is a violation of someone's civil rights, then they should be charged by the federal government. Those charges should be brought on that person for violating the civil rights. That not only holds us accountable to the law and ensures that the civil rights of that person are being addressed and protected, but it sends a message to the rest of the country that the federal government is behind local law enforcement, is behind the local community, and saying, look, we don't agree with the way that this officer acted and your civil rights were violated. And we're going to make sure that people understand this can't happen in the United States. You might be charged with murder, but we're also going to charge you with violating this person's civil rights. We need to sit down and talk with not just police officers, but police officers of color and of course different sexual preferences. So we need to find out from those cops, especially let's say in today's world, African American cops, what's it like to be torn apart in this world? I'm a police officer, but I'm also African American, and I watched one of my brothers being killed by a brother police officer. And I would like to get their perspective, to understand more. And we did that in the committee that I was a part of. The other question is, people are saying this is a systemic problem across the country. I don't think it is. I don't think it's systemic. It might be in certain police departments, but it is certainly not, I think, across the country. There's been great progress made. Since the late 60s and the riots in the 60s, we have a long way to go, obviously, but there's been progress made. Again, I want to repeat, don't make rash decisions during this time of turmoil. We need to have calm, and we need to have dialogue. We need to listen. Training, back to the training thing. And the last thing I want to mention is the tools that police officers have. So technology is one of those things I think that can help us address some of the racial issues For example, there's a machine called rapid DNA, which we can use at crime scenes, which we can identify suspects in 90 minutes with a swab of at a crime scene, put it in a machine. 90 minutes, we'll know if we run it through and the person's DNA is in the CODIS FBI system. We'll know who the suspect is. What does that do? It eliminates us from going out and targeting other people as suspects, and especially if you're a community that believes that people of color are being targeted. So that's one technology. Another is the facial recognition is another a tool that can be used that helps officers as they arrive at a scene, connected to their DMV, the state DMV system. They immediately get a readout from a camera in their glasses, identifies the face through the glasses, connects it with DMV to the driver's license, and says, wait a minute, that is the person who lives at this address. And then immediate tensions are brought down a little bit. So some quick ideas on where we could go. I've got lots of other ones, but man, I really appreciate the time to share some of my thoughts with you, Mike, and with the people that are listening. And I wish you and your wife and your family God's blessings.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dave. You shared with me earlier that you and your wife are celebrating 50 years of marriage. Condolences to your wife. No, I'm kidding. That's quite a milestone. I shared that with my wife, and we're at 27 or 28 years, and she said, "Really, we got to go that far?" But
yeah,
yes,
rookie.
we're still learning here. Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. I have a few closing words here, and inspired by what you've said tonight and our prior conversations. I want to go back to that NBC Wall Street Journal poll that says 80% of voters believe things in our country are, quote, out of control. There are reports this evening that the Seattle Police Department is preparing for the possibility that it may lose control of one of its precinct stations to rioters. The solutions are not radical ideas like those proposed by Seattle's self-proclaimed socialists. To regain control, we must turn to the American values that have strengthened our nation time and time again. The ideal of a just society for all is one of those American values. Achieving it is more of a journey than a destination, as we are learning this week. Like chasing a rainbow, we may only get ever closer to the promised land of equality, but our dedication to pursuing equality for all will have lasting benefits for all of our children. You may not get that sense from what you're hearing today, but we continue to make steady progress. Our founding fathers were dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, but it took 75 more years after they signed the Declaration of Independence before Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery, and decades longer before women could vote. In my lifetime, legal segregation in the South ended, and Black men and women were guaranteed the right to vote. During a time of racial unrest, Governor Dan Evans and Attorney General Slade Gorton recruited the first Black man to run for statewide office in Washington. When he lost, Art Fletcher was hired by President Nixon to lead the nation's first program to provide economic opportunities for Black people. Just a generation later, President George W. Bush appointed the first Black man, then followed by appointing the first Black woman as Secretary of State. Then came the election of our nation's first Black president, Barack Obama. Yes, we are making steady progress. America remains still the beacon for equality and hope for a better future that greeted my father and so many other refugees like him. However, we have not yet reached the promised land, as George Floyd's death reminds us. So let us listen and learn from the experiences and pain of our Black brothers and sisters and from others who have experienced injustice. Let us be tolerant of views that we don't share or don't yet understand so we can hear what they are saying. Let's work to find ways we can join together to quicken our progress toward a more perfect union. We will get closer to the promised land, and we will regain control of our country by reaffirming fundamental American values. Thank you for joining us tonight. You can learn more about my campaign at www.mikevaska.com. Dave, thank you again. Camille, thank you. And Josh, thank you behind the